Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Saturday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. This is the show in which I celebrate artists and their body of worth. What makes a great artist? How do they get from point A to point B and beyond? Well, today we are going to be celebrating a prolific television director, Howard A. Murray, Grace Under Fire, and The Big Bang Theory, King of Queens are just three of the titles that he is known for. I'd like to dedicate today's show to our mutual friend, Ellen Easton, who suggested this interview. So, Ellen, this is for you today. And Howard, first of all, thank you for being here. I do want to put things in perspective. We are coming out of, hopefully, a pandemic. And I want to know how the past year has truly impacted you beyond, well, your agent's calling you right now.
I thought I left it in the house. All right, it's actually my ex-wife, but
okay. Well, say hello.
Hello, friend.
Yes, that's. I'm glad to hear that. But how has the past year impacted you beyond the obvious?
What I noticed as it went along, and it became almost normal in a very strange way, I realized I had it better than almost anyone I know. Mm-hmm. I live in a very nice neighborhood and in a nice house. I have a family. Not being able to hug my kids made me miss them more, mm-hmm. but we certainly got to see them. And I think I learned a lot more grateful for all the wonderful things in my life. And I had been retired for a while, so I didn't have that to worry about. Both my children had, my daughter's in public relations, and she worked out of her house, and she still does, and that worked fine for her. And my son is kind of followed in my footsteps, and he's been working on sitcoms. He's an associate director, and they got to work. I'm so glad I retired before the pandemic, because the idea of wearing a mask, a full shield, and trying to talk to your crew and your cast that way just seemed like would have taken a lot of the fun out of doing that. And also, most of my career, I worked on multi-camera sitcoms that have live audiences, and that's the thing I would have missed the most, was that its response. You get to see if the work you've been rehearsing and doing all week actually was any good. And now they kind of have to do this in a vacuum. There's no audience, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that like this better.
Well, I'm not one of them. I will be honest with you. As a matter of fact, I know that a lot of theaters are starting to slowly reopen. Three of our biggest hits on Broadway, The Lion King, Wicked, and Phantom of the Opera, are all reopening on September 14th. And hopefully the audience will be able to sit in a theater shoulder to shoulder without wearing a mask. I can't imagine that mask being on the face when theater is all about expression.
That's a very different perspective that I wouldn't have known. I don't know that I'd be very comfortable. Mm-hmm. September's still a while away, but my wife and I, even though we've been vaccinated and we're months past the 2-week mark, and that did make life a lot easier. It felt like a burden was lifted, and I still have a problem with people not wearing masks, not when they're out, and I don't necessarily trust that everybody is doing what's in the general.
You and I are definitely on the same page on that issue. I'll tell you that much.
Well, we actually did go to a movie, my wife and I. A good friend of hers that she worked with when she was doing the Gary Shandling show. Alan Zweibel wrote it with Billy Crystal, and we really did want to see it in the theater, and we loved it, as did the other 4 people in there.
Well, you're talking about the latest film that just came out. Yes,
and I can't remember the name of it, but it's really great. I think it's Billy Crystal.
Tiffany Haddish. I can't wait to see it. It's it's on my list of things to do.
It works on so many different levels. It's hilarious, and I think that's Billy Crystal's best work.
That's good to hear.
Great. This one just seemed like it had, it just had a lot of emotion in it as well. It's not a silly comedy at all, but it was kind of nice being in the theater again.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about your path leading to the work that you did. You are retired now, but you were born in New York. I know that you lived, if I'm not mistaken, in Henderson, New York.
Harrison.
And your father, of course, is comedian Jan Murray, who not only was an incredible comedian, also created game shows and worked in that genre as well. You grew up in New York. I want to go back, believe it or not, to the 5-year-old self, because for me, that's that time in your life when you have not been encumbered with peer pressure, with the layers that teachers put upon you or not. And what was your life like as a 5-year-old?
It was just a lot of fun. I think I was 4, maybe 5 when we moved from first house, which was in Woodmere in Long Island. And my younger sister was born. So now they had 3 kids, and they wanted to, they just needed more room. And have to say, Westchester is, still, I would love to be able to live there.
Well, it's just across the river.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of nice places there too. But I really grew up in this. It was beyond a bubble. It was. I knew everyone on my block. It was very, just. The houses were gorgeous. We lived right next to the Westchester Country Club, and learned how to play golf a little bit. Not when I was 5. And everything was new because we had just moved to this new place, and I loved it right away. I still miss it. We moved to Los Angeles in '65.
And have you been able to maintain or hold on to any of the friendships that you had when you were living in New York?
Absolutely. My 2 best friends, I've known and have been in constant touch with since kindergarten, actually. And I visit them, they visit me, we talk, now we Zoom, and soon we'll all be, these guys and their families will be coming out. My daughters, and I want them to be there because they're, I have nice friends in California too, but the ones from, and there's other people, and the one best thing about Facebook is I'm in touch with a lot of people that I hadn't seen since I moved. And like I said, I have some friends that have come in and out of my life, but I lived in this idyllic world. I kind of by 5 knew that my father was not the same as, Mr. Schimmel down the street. Dad had a different kind of job. And at that point, I think he was doing his show Treasure Hunt, which was a game show. And that gave me, just a certain weird status, that I didn't quite understand, but I knew, not everybody else was, going to watch their dad tape game shows on a day off from school or whatever. So I knew that was unusual, and I didn't understand who all of these friends of Dad's were, just what importance, not the right word, how
their stature.
Well, yeah, their stature. And, I met just about all of the close friends moved during those years to Los Angeles, and there became fewer and fewer of Dad's friends there, and that had a lot to do with why he wanted to move out here. He also wanted.
Before your family made the move to California, was your father traveling back and forth a lot?
Well, he was, like I said, he was at that point, right before we moved, he decided he had kind of had it with game shows. He had created them, he produced them, and what made him famous was his stand-up comedy, and that was another benefit of moving to Los Angeles. He was usually playing between 12 and 16 weeks a year in Las Vegas. So this was a lot shorter trip for him. That was a big deal going, and I was thinking of this the other night, how now you can FaceTime, you can Zoom, you can, see people on your cell phone that you're talking to. And it was just very, very different then. And
well, I mean, speaking of which, I mean, we live in a very different world now with social media and everything. Have you embraced social media from the very beginning, or has this past year really moved you deeper into the world of social media?
That's interesting. I think for me, I've as soon as I had my children explain to me Facebook and and that's really, I don't Twitter, I don't Instagram, I don't even know what that stuff means, but it's very Facebook. I loved it, and in many ways I still do, and it has. I have become a little more housebound during a lot of the before the pandemic. I had a series of orthopedic surgeries, so I got very used to being at home. So that wasn't any kind of big change for me. What is that my wife was there with me a lot more, and wonderfully, everything got even better between us.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Now, how old were you when your father came in and announced to the family that you were going to be moving to California?
I was, I think, 12. They had looked at places out here, and when we did finally move, it was, about 6 months after my bar mitzvah, so I was 13. And I went from not knowing or knowing everybody in my class at school. I started ninth grade, which here, that's the beginning of high school. So I'm a freshman, and the school had about 7 times as many students as I was used to. And it was hard. I was not that social at the time. It was weird not having anyone that I knew. And my parents bought a beautiful home on the top of a hill in Beverly Hills. And it just wasn't particularly great to be a kid there until, once my sisters and I got our driver's licenses, then it was a great place to live.
The freedom, yes.
And it just, I think I was excited when they first said, "Hey, we're going to do this." And then when the 2 summers before that, we actually came out here, and we lived at Chateau Marmont in what's now known as Jim or Belushi's cottage or whatever they call it. But it was just so much fun. It was like having this little house, and I met some friends there that became friends for life. Most notably for me was a friend of mine, Rick Caesar, who was Sid Caesar's son. And so I met him there, and they were living in Great Neck, I think. So he kind of went through the same thing a year later of moving out here, and but he didn't have any problem making friends because he was also at that point, I think he was 6'10".
Okay.
And and he was just hilarious. He was this wonderful guy.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me a couple. I hated being here at first, and my parents said, "Listen, we're going to rent this house for 6 months to buy it. So we have 6 months to decide if you really like being here."
Mm-hmm.
And I know we didn't, but almost as soon as we moved here and got in the house, and school's about to start, Dad got a movie in Brazil, to do. He was a crusty riverboat captain, taking Tarzan to, some horrible place. I don't know. It was, so he's not there. My mother is trying to adapt to all this. And she said, listen, when your dad comes back, he's going to ask, do you want to stay here? And I think all of us said, no, absolutely not. My two sisters and I. And before we could even speak, she basically told us, you are going to want to stay here because this is where your father wants to be, and everything we have is because of him. And if he wants to be here, then we all want to be here. And that was kind of an emotional challenge for me.
That's a very interesting way for a mother to tell her kids, to try to adjust to a change in your life.
And they had just such a great relationship, and everything started with them, and they both had kind of separate relationships with us in a way. Because dad was always working, or mostly, and my mother was a housewife.
Mm-hmm.
And they met. They had absolutely nothing in common. My mother was a showgirl at the Copacabana,
mm-hmm.
and my father played there many times, and a mutual friend introduced them, and they were together ever since. And my mother had this she was from the South, and my father was from the Bronx. So it was this.
Where in the South was your mom from?
Well, she was from a little town called Montezuma, Georgia, and her family before that lived in Chunky, Mississippi.
Chunky, Mississippi. That's great.
Yeah, and I actually went there only once with my younger sister and my grandmother. And the house that they lived in there, my great-grandparents, well, great-grandfather was dead, but great-grandmother was there, and it had no indoor plumbing. We used this outhouse. This was probably in 1962.
Wow.
We saw, to our shock and surprise, how Black people are treated differently. We saw all the, whites only were hanging out at a friend of theirs' house, and somebody came to the door. They asked me to, go answer. I said, sure. And I opened it up, and I said, it's for you. And, it just happened to be a Black man standing there. She says, what's his name?
Mm-hmm.
And I told her the name, and she says, well, he knows better than to come to the front door. Yes, really? These people, my family, were so loving, so generous, so nice, but just this deep-rooted, it's not, maybe not the best word, but just kind of ignorance, because
mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that really,
and not to ever excuse that, I grew up in South Carolina in the 60s, so I experienced that firsthand as well. I saw it all around me. I saw the colored bathrooms and the white bathrooms, and the sections of the local drugstore that was a very small section for Blacks only. And, it's crazy that in our lifetimes, and that, we're still dealing with the vestiges of all of that.
Well, and now it's, I think the 4 years of the last presidency kind of exposed just how deeply rooted, and how, I think a lot of us like to think that we've progressed a lot farther than we have. And, it's just,
Howard, based on that, and the fact that we've just been through these past 4 years, have you been an activist throughout your life, or did the last 4 years impact you in terms of the way that you deal with the world, or where do you fit in on the spectrum of that?
Well, I think when I was young, I was very involved in civil rights movement to start, but I was very young, so
mm-hmm.
there was no protests in Harrison, New York, and
mm-hmm.
there was also no Black people there, and not one in the school that we attended. But we also had a housekeeper who was a part of and she actually moved out here with us. We couldn't let her go.
No.
And I just, the idea of her being treated badly was, I just hated it. And then we moved out here, and it's 1965, and I became, as I got closer to 18 years old, very anti-war.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, I went to a lot of rallies and speeches and whatever, and I worked on the first Black mayor of Los Angeles's campaign. And yeah, so it was just, it was a very different time. Now I'm very proud of them as my wife and my daughter they've gone to a bunch of rallies, women's rallies, all kinds of things.
That's great. Well, I want to go back to you talking about your mom coming in and saying, this is important for your dad, for you to get to like it. When did that start to instill deeply within yourself beyond getting a driver's license and having the freedom to leave the house when you wanted to?
Well, we were a very tightly knit group. There was just two sisters, and my mother, my father, and my grandmother lived with us for the last 50 years of her life. And that was it. My father had one brother who was killed in World War II. He was a pilot, got shot down. And my mother was an only child. And so there was no aunts, no uncles, no first cousins. But those that we did have, especially on my father's side, were in New York. So once we came out here, we had very little interaction with them. I know my parents talked to them and whatever, but I also wanted to move back to New York as soon as I could. And I did, and I realized that it's very different, working for, I thought it was a lot of money, $250 a week. And I was working for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and it's the Jerry Lewis charity. And I just loved doing that, but I was, my own one-man band. I had a couple of cameras, and I'd follow Jerry around and shoot him in different settings, and doing his acts sometimes. But a lot of it was really just with children.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I'm trying to adjust to not living in Beverly Hills, and the places I lived on my own. The last couple of years I was there. And boy, I saw New York in a whole different way, and I couldn't wait to get back.
Be careful what you wish for.
Oh, exactly. And I said, why did I ever want to do this? Then
now, I want to ask you did you ever want to go into, if you'll pardon the expression, your family business? Your father was a comedian. Did you ever think about doing stand-up, or was that never on the realm of possibility for you?
I think deep down, there must have been a little bit of that. But as I got older and going through high school, I just decided I didn't want to have anything to do with the business, because I saw it at the highest level. Mm-hmm. And that's not really how it works. And, I lacked the self-confidence you need to do that. Mm-hmm. I was always, funny. It was funny in elementary school, high school, whatever, a little bit of the class clown. And I realized that's what, that was my best trait for, socially and whatever. But the idea of going on a stage never appealed to me. And just through a wonderful set of circumstances, I wound up, I decided to pursue film. Mm-hmm. Which I took some courses at local community college, and then I transferred to USC, which at the time, and still, people would argue that they have the best cinema arts program in the country.
Well, do you mind if I ask, what was the deciding factor that made you want to pursue that end of the business?
Well, I realized when I was taking those classes that I almost have the jump on everybody. I've been in TV studios my whole life. I've been, I watched my father a million times from the wings of the light booth when I was a kid, when he was doing in Vegas a lot. And I liked it. I like I think the thing that I liked the most was that it looked like you don't have to wear a suit and tie on these jobs.
Okay.
And when I got out of film school, I made a feature with these two guys that was awful, but we made it, and I was proud of it. And that got me the job at Muscular Dystrophy. So I was blessed. I didn't have a clear path. I had no idea that I was going to wind up in sitcoms.
Mm-hmm.
I had done game shows. I had done music videos. I had done, small cable children's shows, pretty much a little of everything, commercials. And I liked all of it, but none of it really made me say, oh, this is what I have to do. They were jobs, and jobs that, I thought I could do pretty well. And then through a mutual friend called Tony Thomas, who was Danny Thomas's son, and he had 4 shows on the air. His company with Thomas Harris had Soap and Benson, and 4 shows at the same time. And this friend called Tony and said, "Hey, Howard Murray, Jan's son, he's great." He just, I didn't ask him. I was shocked. And Tony Thomas calls me. We have a brief talk. He sends me to meet the producer, and they give me a job in post-production on a show that actually Danny Thomas was the star with Canova, and I remember Martin Short. That was one of the first things he did. And I think by the end of the first couple of episodes, I knew this is what I want to do. I loved it. I loved everything about it, and I became very proficient in editing. And that started my career, because now I did have a path. These are the kinds of things I want to do. And it's a freelance business. I started out as a staff, just worked my way up from post-production. Then I became a booth AD. And then eventually I got a shot to direct a show, mm-hmm. which was Jack Klugman and John Stamos before John became really famous. And just the best group of people. You have this built-in, and I've worked on shows that I loved everybody, and unfortunately a couple where from the top you didn't feel appreciated, or there was like different layers importance, and what I love about it. It's a very communal process.
Well, there are several things that you've brought up that I really want to talk about for a moment. I want to go back to your father for just a moment.
Sure.
You grew up in a household with a very successful man in the business. That's not always the case for some people that grow up with that. So what was the biggest impact or life lesson that your father gave you that, number one, impacted you as a human being, and number two, impacted your work ethic?
Okay. What I learned from Dad, as far as his work went, he worked very hard. And as I got older, if he was doing some summer stock or a movie, whatever, I just loved being with him. And if I wanted to be with him, it was either on a set or it was on the golf course, which was, some of the most pleasurable times in my life with him. But I just saw how much he was in by his friends, his colleagues. He was always considered, just the nicest guy. And he just, he led by example. He never pushed me. I think he probably would have preferred me not going into business necessarily. But he just always had family first. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And like I said, we're a very close-knit bunch, and it remained that way. Well, we still are. There's just more of us. And unfortunately, my parents' generation now are gone. Mm-hmm. But he just taught me that you do work hard. You do put the best you have out there day. And he also was somebody that, I'd see how to deal with people come up to him because, he's on TV every day. So especially in a town like Harrison, everybody knew who he was. And, if we went out to dinner, half the restaurant would come over and, ask for an autograph or tell a story. And that really sometimes bothered me. It's like, we don't get that much dad time as it is. And it just felt like, well, why are these people more? Mm-hmm. And I learned just how selfish and, just really ignorant that attitude was. And he told me more than once, these are the people that have provided the life that we all have. So why wouldn't I want to take a picture with them or whatever? I just thought he was gracious. He was a gentleman at all times, and he was the normal one amongst his friends. Most of those guys did have families, and like I said, Caesar's son, but children. My high school was just filled with, being the son of the only celebrity in Harrison. And then I come to Beverly Hills High School and everybody's, this guy's father owns this studio. This kid, had Barry Gordy's daughter. I remember going there, Ella Fitzgerald's son, Ray Brown Jr. And so it wasn't a big deal. It was just, but what I learned in some ways is that it took me a long time to figure out was the bubble I live in and have always lived in. I've had crummy apartments and, it worked my way up. But it didn't matter. I always had people with me. I always had this, family to all of us is a safety net. And that's always the most important thing. And that's how, what I did learn from Dad. I loved his life and I wanted to have that as well, which was not, I had no interest in fame or anything, but the business is exciting a lot of times. And
well, I want to talk about that aspect of the business. You have been lucky enough, and of course the talent is there for that luck to meet together. But how ambitious were you in terms of pursuing the work that you did, or did opportunities come your way because of the connections you had? And that's not to take away from what you brought to the table.
Gotcha. I know that I was blessed to, have this very solid, strong family, and my parents both knew, just all these incredible people. And I just was not ambitious at all when I started. I did just kind of wait for the next thing to happen rather than pursue the next thing. And I saw other people in my situation, and they were much more ambitious than I was. So when I fell into sitcoms, it was a revelation. This is what I want to do. This is, I just loved it. I loved, live and, I work with some incredibly talented people doing guest shots and things on different sitcoms. And my wife on a sitcom that she was starring in, and
that was Harry and the Hendersons.
Harry and the Hendersons, and that's a picture behind me. I could see it.
Yes.
My wife, and she was in all the American Pie movies. She played Jason Biggs' mother. She actually baked the pie.
Now that's something to put on a resume.
Exactly. So, and we got very friendly. I was still married at the time, and about probably 15 years later, I just called her. I was divorced, and I said, "Who would I? I hadn't dated, in a couple of decades, and it's like, well, who did I really like? Who was fun?" And I thought of Molly right away, and I called her, and we went on a date, and we've been together ever since. And that was probably almost 20 years ago. Yeah, because I never I'd wind up with an actress because the built-in narcissism and neediness, and she had none of that. She was just like how I consider myself, just a regular person. That was her job, her career, but it didn't define her. And I think that helped me as my career. You go through a lot of peaks and valleys, but I went through just like it felt like a crash, as if they had sent a inter-industry memo: don't hire Howard Murray. He's and I wouldn't know why that was, but that's what it felt like. And it's just circumstance. Mm-hmm. The showrunners, the head writers, the network people, the studio people, everybody gets a vote on whether you work or not. And there were times where I knew I was being kind of blackballed. I can't remember, I think it was at Columbia, for a year or two. My agent couldn't figure it out. And then, so that was the studio I worked for a lot. So that was kind of painful.
Without naming any names or circumstances, do you know why that black ball was in place?
Years later, I kind of found out what it was.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm all about celebrating, so I don't want to talk bad of anyone that's not here to join in the conversation. But what was, beyond that, what was the lowest point that you have gone through career-wise? And what was the motivation to get you through that low point?
I'm pretty sure it was when I hadn't had a directing job in months. I switched agents and just nothing was happening, and it was very frustrating. But as I learned from my father, is you work, and I certainly was very good at jobs, post production, being the associate director, which you kind of are somewhat in charge of the cameras and what they're shooting at each time. So you try and just be, a director. And I also had a family. Mm-hmm. I had a divorce that was, not particularly pleasant at the time. And I had two young children. And so I have to work. And so I just had to come to a decision that I can't look at my career as the thing that defines me. Mm-hmm. And once I got there, after all the, what happened? What did I do wrong? Why me? How come this guy's working? And blah, blah, blah. And then so I started taking jobs that were, not lesser jobs, but once you get to be the director, that, that's a pretty powerful position. And I had a lot of fun. The blackball thing, I will say, and it doesn't matter who or why, but an executive had heard rumors that I had been bad-mouthing a director who she was very close with. And I was shocked when I heard that, because I'm not being funny here at all, but usually I am. Mm-hmm. And these were things that came out at parties, and just the usual, make fun of everybody, including ourselves. But this, for whatever reason,
it was just based on a rumor and innuendo.
Yeah, she didn't say, "Hey, what do you have against this guy?" or anything, which was nothing. I loved working with him. I mm-hmm. was his associate director for a long time. You realize you're not in control. You aren't protected at any job. Each one is a new experience. And when I took this job, there was another Directors Guild category. It's called audience switcher, and I'd never done that. But that was something that somebody called and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing this?" I said, "Yeah, need to make money." And it was actually on a Jason Alexander show, one of the ones he did, soon after Seinfeld, and it didn't go anywhere. And they actually pulled the plug. That was this was during, I remember, an audience showing up, like 2 days later, wanting to be entertained. And it was very hard for everybody, especially Jason. Mm-hmm. But I came to the realization when I did that and a couple of other lesser jobs the thing that, has gotten me through and makes me proud of my career, but also I'm not my career. I'm me. And if anything, I'd like to be defined by is the quality of my family that I've created.
Well, that's why I refer to it as your body of worth as opposed to your body of work. That's exactly why I go there. But I want to go back for a moment. You mentioned switching agents, and I want to talk a little bit about agents in this business. When you have an agent, how proactive are you in terms of the machinations that they're making when it comes to your career?
Well, first of all, it's not that easy getting an agent. And the first ones I had were good, but I couldn't, for years, I couldn't make my living just by directing. I had to take associate directing jobs, which I loved doing that too. And that might have been the thing I was best at, because you did editing, you did the shots, and while you're shooting it, and you had a lot of input into the show. I just forgot the question.
No, I was asking how involved you were in the machinations of what your agents were doing in your career.
Oh, you really don't know what they're doing until something happens. And you just have to hope. Eventually you realize that, once, they're pimps, they're flesh peddlers. And you're the person that, is going to benefit by all of their associations with studios, networks, and writers. And I don't know.
Well,
it's not a good answer, but
well, when somebody looks at one's career, they look at those high points, like The Big Bang Theory, King of Queens, other shows that you worked on. For you personally, what was the big break for you in terms of your career, in terms of what filled you emotionally?
Well, that would be my very first sitcom job. That just really put me on a path that I understood. I saw the steps you might be able to take, and I also saw people come and go and never work in the business again. Going back to just the agent thing, the first ones I had, it never got me a job. I had them for a couple of years. I got everything. I would call them and say, hey, I know this producer, I know, somebody at this network likes me or whatever. So that was as participatory as I got. And then once you get a certain amount of success, you need them to do your negotiating. That's the most important part.
Now I have a question, because I really don't understand, for a director, I know what it's like for an agent with actors submitting actors and actresses for a specific role or something. But when it comes to submitting someone to be a director, the agents that you had, were they exclusive to you, or did they have other clients as well that were also directors?
Oh, you're on a list, no question about it. I started with they called themselves a small boutique agency, but they had mainly writers and a couple of directors. And in all fairness, if somebody says, "Well, yeah, we know Howard, he's fine, but you have anyone else?" And then you wind up being the beneficiary of that sometimes. And other times you feel like your agent screwed you. It's like, why is that guy working and I'm not? And I was a tough sell. It's a long time. It felt like years from the first directing job I had. I thought, now I'm a director and I'm going to get a bunch of other stuff. And I didn't. But eventually you realize it's all the associations and the people that and like you are the ones that are going to hire you. Every once in a while they would get me a job and I didn't know anybody in the cast and the writer's room or whatever. And sometimes that was nice, because for the first couple of years of my directing career, I'd take the lesser job of associate director, and then I could, because I would was very good at that. I could negotiate myself to get one episode. If a new show out of the first 13, it's probably like 3 or 4 different series that I did episode number 13, which sometimes is the last one, and sometimes it's just the beginning. But it was a lot easier going in as a director when the people and the cast don't really know you, because you want to go in with and give them a fresh look. For whatever reason you get hired.
Now, was there ever a situation which, with the shows that you directed, that it was difficult for you to let go? And on the other flip side of that coin, were there shows that you couldn't wait for it to let go of you?
Boy, I loved every show I worked on, to tell you the truth. And
that's wonderful. That's great.
There were ones that, they give you, one episode with an option for another one. And on the show I met my wife, just so I was hired to do one. And then I think that went pretty well. And then this was during their second season. And then I got a bunch of them the next year. And I actually I did the last, the series conclusion, a 2-parter. And that made me feel really good, because I did feel like that was kind of my family in a lot of ways. It was very interesting. They kind of shot in a different way than I had been used to. Mm-hmm. So I also got to learn a lot of stuff about other ways of, looking at, because they didn't have special effects, but they had a 7-foot guy in a monkey suit, basically. It was hair was individually placed in there, and it was yak hair. Mm-hmm. And but whatever, that wasn't the most successful show in the world. They did 3 seasons, and it was just a comfortable fit for me. And a lot of shows were, and there was other ones. I remember one was Jeff Foxworthy's show. Mm-hmm. It had been on a while, and they were unhappy with how it was going. And for whatever reason, they hired me thinking that I could get a better performance out of Jeff Foxworthy. And they kept saying, you got to kick his ass. You have to do this. And I wasn't that familiar with him, other than his, you're a redneck kind of stuff, and not particularly my kind of humor. But, so what? And I think I did 3 or 4, and I just realized this is not every show is a good fit for me. I was glad I had them. I'm glad I still, get a residual every now and then from it. But it just let me know that you create the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. If you're the director. And I went in on certain shows where, there was kind of a doom and gloom feeling, especially when they bring in a director nobody's heard of. And other times it's just so easy. And I had many more of those.
That's great.
King of Queens, that I started as the switcher. And then the director said, you want to be the associate director, and which would have meant him getting rid of a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And I said, I can't, I just can't do that to him. I'd love to do the job, but this guy's been here for 6 seasons, and he says he's gone whether you take the job or not.
Wow.
And so what am I, I felt badly. I took it, and I know he felt that, somehow I had campaigned for that, and I didn't at all. I was fine being up.
That's one of the unfortunate foibles of this business. I've been in that position myself, where you get a job, and the same thing happened to me once. Yeah. And the person thought that I stabbed him in the back, and I absolutely begged them to keep him on board. So I know exactly where you're from.
Well, I also have had that with stage managers who want to get in the booth and just have no facility. You can do one. And a couple of people were really good at it, but I'm not the boss. I can say, this is who you have to hire. And this one friend of I brought on several shows, said, I really want to get in the booth. I think I can do it. And I said, well, take a couple of episodes off as a stage manager and sit in the booth and see how it's done. You just hear it through a headset. And I said, it's a very different world in there. And you have to be watching, 5 monitors at once. You have to know what shot everybody's supposed to be on at all times. And if someone's not right, you have to correct it. Say, go left, this is supposed to be a single, not a 2-shot. And it just flies by. And for whatever reason, that I love that part of it.
Well, I want to ask, from the beginning of your career to your retirement, what are some of the biggest changes that you saw in the business that you absolutely think are for the betterment of the business? And what are some of the things that are no longer in the business that were in place when you came into the business that you miss?
Well, at a certain point, I think it was when I think Grace Under Fire was the last show, or one of the last ones I directed from the booth. It became, there used to be 2 formats. There was videotape and there was film. And film shows, you have to hit your marks better. You have 3 guys on every camera. You have a focus puller. You have dolly grip, and the guy who's the actual cameraman. And there's 4 of those. And it's just a lot of stuff going on. And I loved the control I felt I had in the booth. It was a very safe place. I didn't have to stand by a monitor and listen to the warm-up guy, get the audience all riled up, and you're trying to hear the notes from the producers. But that's what it became. Film started to be the way all of the sitcoms were being done. A lot of them, the multi-camera shows became single camera shows. And that's progress in a certain way, but there's still a ton of multi-camera shows that are making it. Mm-hmm. And Big Bang is, what a wonderful show to work on. As the last thing I did. It just top to bottom, I just loved it. And I love that cast. Everybody was, they all are still all friends and together. I left after the 5th year I retired, when I turned 60. And by then my son had already worked his way up. His first job coming out of film school was being the night runner on Big Bang Theory. The producer said, "What's Jacob doing?" Because I'd known her forever. And I said, "Hey, he's finishing up film school, and he's trying to see where he's going to fit in." She says, "You think he'd like a job on the show?" And I said, "I know I would." I said, I think he would. And she hired him as he'd go to his classes during the day, then he'd go over there, at 4 or 5 o'clock, and every night of the week there's a rewrite. And there are probably dozens of people that need the revised script delivered to their door. It's almost like an ego thing. Most of these people don't read it. The actors do. They need it. As a director, I need to see the changes so I can prepare for the next day. But that was his life. I had I think went back far enough that I actually was telling you need a Thomas guide, which is this thing that has every neighborhood route. It's how you figured out where you're going and how to get there before there was Google Maps and GPS and these. Now you if you can punch in an address, you can go anywhere. And in those days, that hadn't happened yet. But so they loved him. His second year, he went from being the night runner. He became the producer's assistant. And then I think this was actually soon after I left, that created a chain reaction in jobs. And he wanted to try the audience switching, which is very hard. And the person who was doing that job wouldn't, she just, for her own reasons, didn't want anyone, not just him, but anyone in the booth with her while she's doing that. And I said, I really want him to learn this. I want him to at least see what goes on. And she just refused, I pointed out that I had helped get her job, and that didn't sway her. But they became good friends, and after I left, they told Jacob that if he really wanted it that bad, they were going to give him one episode, and it was do or die. And if he didn't do well, he was going to have to, he would not have his old job as the assistant to the producer. So it's such risk involved in that, but that's what you do. Yeah, I can do that.
That's wonderful.
And he kicked ass. He did a great job. She insisted I be there. I said, what is he doesn't need me. I can't help him. I can't jump in and she's wanting to make me feel better. Mm-hmm. If you were there, and I watched him for like 10 minutes. I said, I don't need to be here. He does get it. He's very smart, and he has great editing skills. He also writes stuff. Has his own comic book brand that is on sale. He has other things he could do and that he's interested in, which I never did. Wow. When I had a hiatus, I played golf as much as I could because, I just didn't want to sit down and write anything, even though I've been encouraged to over the years. But I'm just saying he got in because of me. I got, in through a zillion different contacts and people I knew, and that gets you in the door. I could have a meeting for, anything that, seemed like a reasonable place for me to work, but then you have to do the work. And the work is what I loved about it. Mm-hmm. Like I said,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Every show I worked on, I loved it. My attitude was, this is the greatest show in the world. You can't walk around. It's like, oh, this is drag. I hate this. This writing sucks. No, this is.
So what was the deciding factor for you to retire? What was the deciding factor for you to retire?
Well, there was a couple. I was just about 60, at which point I could through the Directors Guild, I had 2 just wonderful pensions. So it became clear that I could probably financially not have that. And my parents left each of us a nice sum of money. And that certainly helped in the decision. But the only reason I left was because I physically couldn't do the work anymore because I have a lot of joint surgeries. I had 7 knee surgeries, just had a shoulder replacement, and just walking on the cement stage for a couple of days, I need that same amount of days where I was laying in bed in pain. And it just became, it's hard to look forward to going into work. And I was also, I'll do this quickly, I was in a massive depression 2 years earlier. My mom had been killed in a traffic accident, and it just tore me up. And I just was not enjoying the work. And, if you're working on a comedy, you got to have or you should at least,
yes,
have a good attitude. And I realized I didn't. And I did this, I retired after this one episode I did, and I will not name names, but there was a guest actor on there who it was the first time I had directed something, and I loved this show. That I just she made me almost hate it. She was so dismissive, and she was kind of a big sitcom star, and she came on as she'd come on every maybe 2-3 times a year. She played one of the characters' mothers, and it was just like, I don't need this anymore. She took all the fun out of it for you.
That's great.
And I just said, I talked to my wife, and she had retired from acting, even though she still would act from time to time if the right thing came out. She didn't miss it at all. And everybody says, well, you've been retired for so long, don't you miss it? And absolutely not. I loved it so much, but I did it. And it, the craziness that you go through, trying to deal with so many different groups of people. Even, you know, you have to have great relationships with your camera guys, with the sound department. You have to know something about set design. There's just so many different things, and that's what I loved about it. And yeah, I just, for those reasons, I just decided to cash in or cash out, actually. And I've never missed it. I also had my son working on that show. I left after season 5. He stayed through all 12 seasons and worked his way up to the job I had, associate director. You know, I didn't direct a lot of those episodes. I directed a few. And that meant all I had, I worked 2 days a week, and that suited me at that time. So I still had, I realized I loved him telling me stories about what was going on the set, and, you know, who said what. You know, it was fun to be, my son knew all the stuff that I know now, and I could talk to him about that. And he probably didn't always appreciate my input or whatever, but it just, that kept me connected in some way. But I realized what you miss is you miss people. I had so many wonderful relationships, you know, that were so intense. Some, you know, there were times where I got to decide who the camera guys were, and, you know, pick different people, pick the editor. And I used my friends. I used people that they didn't start as my friends, but I said, here's a camera guy who's considered, you know, like on the upper level, but he's a pain in the ass and prima donna. And here's this other guy who you've worked with and isn't great, but he gets the job done. And he's so when I had that option, it's, everybody thinks that nepotism is what makes it all go round. And in my case, that certainly helped a great deal. Same thing for my son. But that's just not, I forgot where I was going. I've got you made my mind start twirling, and I got 1,000 stories.
Well, that's my goal in life, to make your mind twirl. I can't believe this, but we are at the end of our show. I want to be respectful of your time. I want to be respectful of the time of everyone that tuned in today. Stick around for a second. I just want to say my goodbyes. I want to thank you all for being here today. If you are here for the first time, please consider subscribing to Richard Skipper Celebrates on YouTube. If you liked today's show, and I hope you did, please hit the like button, leave a comment. That helps in terms of the analytics and the viewership with this particular interview. I also want to thank Ellen Easton once again for making this suggestion. Thank you, Ellen. And I want to, I end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list, and the fourth name that pops up, reach out with a phone call, not an email message, not a text message, not a private message, a phone call, and let that person know what they mean to you. As a dear friend of mine says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. And you never know what someone else is going through right now. But I say, if you're going to be in a boat, make sure you bring a skipper along. Howard, I want to thank you for the gifts that you've given to the world, and your father as well, and your entire family. May it continue forever. Thank you for being here today. I'm actually going to leave the screen so that you have the final word today. You can say anything about anything that we talked about today that you want to expound upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to everyone who's watching right now. And again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Richard. I appreciate it. And I know probably some of my family is watching this, and I don't know what the rest of the audience is, but I love Richard's. He just approaches things from a different viewpoint than I'm used to on these. And I have a wealth of information in my head, and I think I didn't do a very good job of explaining anything or making anything. I do love what Richard said. We are all in this together, and we all live our own separate lives, but our lives affect a lot of people around us, and when in doubt, kindness should win the day. And I hope all of you that did watch enjoyed some of it, and I wish you all the best of luck, and maybe I'll see you again here. Who knows? So that's it for me. Thank you.